If you watched the last video I did talking about chatterbaits, I talked about how we don't need to complicate fishing a chatterbait. Everybody's overcomplicating fishing a chatterbait. We've made this way more difficult than it really is, when it's probably really and truly one of the most simple and easiest baits for you to catch a fish on. And I broke it down to two very simple setups that you can use to start catching fish on them. Make this simple on yourself. Go with a white chatterbait and go with a green chatterbait. Two colors. Forget the rest. Now, this is a part where I tend to become a little bit more complicated when it comes to chatterbait fishing. When it comes to the rod that I like to use, I do get a little bit more particular. However, if you're a beginner chatterbait fisherman, you've never caught a fish on a chatterbait, or you're starting to just develop some confidence in a chatterbait, this conversation, just tie the thing on and try to catch you, figure out where to fish and get some confidence. Once you start catching some fish on a chatterbait, this will make a lot more sense and you'll understand why it's important to have the right rod or have the right line or the right reel. But in the beginning, you just need to focus on just catching some fish on the thing and getting some confidence in it. For you guys that are a little bit more advanced and you've already started catching fish on chatterbait, got some confidence in it, very important to have the right rod set up. I have two. I think it's very important to talk about context when it comes to chatterbait fishing. I have two rods that I use my chatterbaits on, and it all depends on where I'm actually putting the chatterbait at. Okay, here's my two rod setups. Number one, this is a 7'2" medium heavy power rod. It is a graphite rod. It is, you know, it's got a little bit of tip to it, but I can turn a fish around with it. One of the things that we need to remember when we're fishing a chatterbait is that a chatterbait is not necessarily a finesse bait. If you're throwing a jackhammer chatterbait, it has a 5/0 Gamakatsu hook in it. It's a flipping hook. It's not a small hook. So we got to be careful. I was wrong about this in the beginning, as I always thought about, you got to get a soft rod to absorb the bite and all this bull crap. You're talking about a 5/0 flipping hook, and almost all of these chatterbaits have a really big hook. So you need a rod to be able to drive home that hook. You can't come out here with some kind of pansy rod trying to catch a fish on a chatterbait, because the geometry of it just doesn't work. So remember that. Chatterbait has a big hook. You got to be able to drive that home. So you need a rod that has some backbone to it. When I'm fishing a chatterbait around docks, if I'm fishing a chatterbait in a place where I want to try to skip it under something, if I want to place it, I like to use a little bit stiffer rod, and I prefer a graphite rod. This is a favorite Phantom series 7'2" rigged. It's medium heavy power. It's soft enough to where I could use like 15-pound test line and not worry about breaking it, but it's got enough backbone that where I can place the bait very efficiently and very precisely. You can't do that with softer rods. Anytime you use a soft rod, you're going to sacrifice some of your ability to cast very precisely. Okay, trying to put it in very specific areas, target oriented fishing with a chatterbait, go with a little bit stiffer rod. The one that I like to use is a Phantom rigged series. That's the one I'm about to rig my chatterbait up on right now. Okay, in this video I'm just talking about the rods. We'll talk about reels and line on another video, but I really just want to drive home this point about the rods right now. That ain't a big, that's another 2-pounder. This is exactly what I was talking about. If you're fishing a chatterbait or open flats, grass flats, if you're fishing a chatterbait around riprap, somewhere that you don't have to cast nearly as precisely, I like a graphite composite rod or a glass rod.
Jeez. Here. He's 3. Stop.
Our rod is
Three,
better designed for casting a chatterbait in open areas, grass flats, or just a normal pea gravel bank, somewhere where my cast, I don't care. If I'm going to try to cast it as far as I can, I'll probably use my signature series rod, which is a 7'2" as well, medium heavy power. Where you say, well, Brian, this one was a medium heavy power too. What's the difference? The difference is the material that this one is made out of. It is a composite rod, so it is much more forgiving. It's very, you can see this rod is bending all the way down here to the second guide. It's still got some bend to it. The reason I like it for that, there are times where they kind of don't get a chatterbait that good, and I do feel like a softer rod works for me in a lot of situations. I hate when they have a chatterbait just barely skin hooked right in the jaw. You don't want a stiffer rod, because a lot of times a stiffer rod is just going to pull that last little bit of skin hook out of his face. With a graphite composite rod, there's 2 things. I like the feedback that I get from a graphite composite rod. And when I say feedback, it's actually less. I don't have to use near as big of line, or I can get away with using smaller line with a graphite composite rod. I can use 15-pound test line, which will give the chatterbait a little bit more vibration. It will also let the chatterbait sink down a little deeper. And thirdly, 15-pound test line will let you cast a little bit farther. Okay, so with that being said, I like the graphite composite in those situations. There's 2 different chatterbaits that I like to throw. Both of them you can find on my website. The Chatterbait Mini Max, 100%, I like to throw it on the graphite composite. It has a little bit smaller hook. It's more finessey. I feel like it's just a better combo. It's a lighter hook. When I'm throwing the jackhammer and I'm trying to put that in very precise areas, it's going to be this one right here. That's going to be the guy I throw. So think about that. Think about your rod combination when you're fishing a chatterbait. Very, very important, I feel like, to have the right rod set up, just so you get the most out of the bait. When you're trying to put the bait in precise locations, skip the bait. Put it in shade pockets. Put it around isolated cover. When you're trying to put it on their docks, go with a graphite rod, a little bit shorter, something that you can cast more precisely with. If you're using a chatterbait in wide open casting situations, grass flats, if you're using it on bare banks, pea gravel banks, if you're using it around riprap, if you're using it anywhere where your cast, you're just trying to get the longest cast to cover the most amount of water, go with the graphite composite. I think you're going to be a lot happier with this setup. You can use mine, the favorite, of course, I got to throw that plug in there. Use my favorite B-Lat 6-stick that I designed specifically for throwing lipless crankbaits, chatterbaits, for throwing medium diving crankbaits. That's what this rod is designed for, and I really feel like you'll be happy with it.